All right. So I think the main point is like, okay, we have a class, we give it this attribute of like ingredients, right, which represents the table, and then we have these columns, and then we have like, is it expensive? This question, this is an instance method, but like everything that we've been writing so far inside our objects have been instance methods. And that means that like the questions we ask are about a particular object. So for example, here I just create a new ingredient, right? Just by initializing one. And then I'll set the price to be 12. So you can now, if we look at the underdict, we can see that the price is 12. And now if I ask, okay, flour dot is expensive, it will ask that question of this particular ingredient, right? And it returns true. So that's an instance method. With a class method, the question is not about a particular, like we know that this is about this particular ingredient, even before we call the method. It's like, is this thing expensive? With a class method, which you do by doing this at class method, all right? And then you can do like def, like call like expensive. Or like, let's do like most expensive, okay? This is not about a particular ingredient. Even though it only returns one ingredient, this is really like, what is the most expensive ingredient of all of them, right? That's different than this. This is not asking about the collection, right? This is saying, is this particular ingredient that we are, defining as this thing, right? Is that thing expensive? Is a particular ingredient expensive? Then here we have, okay, what is the most expensive of the collection? So these are for answering two different kinds of questions. This is on the instance, and you, like I said, you know what the instance is kind of by the time you call the method, right? Flour, is it expensive? If we did another one, like tomato sauce, right? Is it expensive? So we're just asking the question of this particular instance. Now for a class method, you call this method on the class, all right? So for example, we'll do ingredient dot most expensive. Okay, so this is asking the class, okay, of the collection of ingredients, which one is the most expensive? One way to kind of like distinguish that, like it's like, well, how do you know which one to do? One way to just think about it is, remember our class is kind of like the factory, right? So if you think of the factory as the thing that like produces all of our ingredients, like think of it like headquarters. Like ask headquarters, what's the most expensive? Don't ask, a particular, or like this analogy really holds if you think of like a car. Like you're not going to ask a particular car, like what's the most expensive car to be sold? But you might ask like the factory or like headquarters, like what is the most expensive car that you've sold or that you produce, right? So that's kind of how you design this, how you think through whether this should be an instance method or a class method. The other thing is, you can also think about how it's implemented, right? So here we have our cursor, and we'll do maybe, okay, cursor.execute, select all from ingredients, where, let's say, order by price descending, right, from largest to smallest means descending, limit 1. And you can do cursor.fetch1, right? And then if we had like a build, we could just return this. But if we had a build from record method, right, we would probably return the instance. So now we call this, it gives us back the most expensive ingredient, right? And when you look at the implementation, this is selecting from all the ingredients. Like there's no where clause, there's no where clause. It's not like where the ID equals 1, right? It's of all the ingredients, tell me which is the most expensive, which seems like a class method to me, right? We're querying the entire collection. Okay. So those are kind of, some of the main points is who are you asking, class method, you're asking a question about the collection. With an instance method, you're asking a question about a particular object, right? An instance of the class. Okay? That part feel okay? Yeah. All right. The next thing to understand is just self. Okay? Remember, self is whatever is to the... Oh, there might be a chat question. If you're using cursor.fetch1, do you still have to limit 1? I guess not. Probably not. I probably would, though. I don't know why. Just because you're not returning all the objects at this point, I think. Like this query isn't going through all the instances either. It's just, maybe it does. But anyway, I would probably still do the limit 1. Okay, so for this, the next point is self. So what is self with a class method? Remember, self is whatever's to the left of the dot. So when you call ingredient.mostExpensive, the self should be this, right? It should be the ingredient class. So if we print out self here, did I do it? Print self. Oh, we should print self on this object, this class, this method. So we'll print most expensive. See that? What is self? Class ingredient, capital ingredient, right here. So self is this thing, is the ingredient class itself. Now if I call self on is expensive, that would be on this thing, like flour.isExpensive. So we'll create a new flour, and now you can see this is different. This is an ingredient object. This is the class ingredient. Okay, class method, self is the class. Instance method, self is the instance. All right, so those are the main lab. We can delete this. So, oh, I'm muted.
You're not. We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me? It said I was muted. Thanks. So let's do this. Okay, so we got this category thing. Why is this telling me I'm muted? Record without audio.
Can hear you.
Yeah, I know. It just gave me a weird notification. All right, this seems better. So, all right, so we'll run this test category file. This is probably a good thing to start with, is like, just remember how to read these things, So when we run this test, remember, because we have the argument inside the test, this will call build category, and this is a fixture, right? So this is gonna call this method. So I just scroll up, look at this. That calls this drop all tables method. Where does that come from? Probably source, right? It's not coming from decimal or this stuff, right? It must be coming from source. The other way you can figure it out is, right, just pressing command click, and then that can kind of show you where that's occurring, right? And this is what had the error, that had those 2 extra tables that didn't exist. So let's go back. Then you can see we're creating a category, right, like a blank category. We are, setting some value on it, like the name here. We're then saving it to the database. So that's kind of the whole point, is remember when we run our tests, the idea is we start with a blank slate, right? So we clear out everything. So this drop all tables calls this drop tables function, which then calls this drop records function. So it's like delete all the records. So go through each table that we list for every table in the listed table names. Call drop records and delete, right? Delete for all the records in that table. And then, so basically we clean our table, a clean slate, right? Then we create a new instance, set some data, save it. So now we should just have one record in the database this taco places, then we yield to the test. So that is this find by name, I think. Yeah, test find by name. So then finally, this gets called. It looks to see that taco places record, right? When you're looking at the test, this is telling you, like, giving you a hint or really kind of defining what should be returned, right? So if we're doing the dot notation, then you know that what's getting returned, what we need to be returned is an object, right? As opposed to like a dictionary or a list or whatever, right? So we need an object with an attribute of name that's assigned to taco places. Yeah, go ahead, Abhinav.
Yeah, before you yield like returns control, can you save some kind of state that can be saved between them outside of the database, just like a variable or something?
What did you have in mind?
If you wanted to save like the ID or something that was created for the category that was just created, could you save it somewhere on line 13 and have it accessible within the function?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So yeah, you can pass through. So say you want to, you can pass through something here, and whatever you put after this space is going to be actually referenced here. So like a typical example of this might be the database itself. I think I gave this example sometime that like lots of times what you'll see is like, let's say you wanted to pass through the category because we're not saving it in the database, for example. You can pass it through by like yield then the word category, right? And now what this will do is when we call this find by name, this build category thing will be the category that you yielded. So let's put a breakpoint here. So basically what I'm saying is that this object that we initialized, let's just change it to prove it. Just call it taco, have a name of taco, is what's passed through here. So this is like an argument to the function, right? It's an argument to the, you can imagine yield really is just us calling the find by name function, and the argument we're passing through is this category, all right? So now if I put a breakpoint here, this thing should be the object that has the name of just taco, right? So let's take a look. So we'll do PyTest, test category. This should hit our breakpoint, and now we are right here, and this build category should be this category that we pass through. So we look at build category, right? That's the, and you do .name, that's this instance. Yeah. In this case, right, we don't have to do that because this is kind of like a global, right? We always kind of have access to the database so long as we have access to like our connection. Cool. All right, so now let's, so we'll run this. Let's change back our data, our original data. So this was just taco places, I think. Taco places. And then we want to call our function. And we can just like follow the error message down. So run this, and what do we get? We have category has no attribute find by name, right? The category class has no attribute find by name. So that means that we should be writing a class method here. And def find by name. We know the first argument is always going to be self, right? And then we can look at the interface to see what we need to pass through. So it's like sometimes we'll just copy these like directly here. And it's like, oh, okay, well, we'll need, the name here. Instead of test cursor, this should be like any cursor, right? And then you can put a breakpoint here if you want. And now we're inside, right, the class, or sorry, inside this method because this was called from category.findByName. So if you look inside here, you should see that the name, right, is taco places. And the cursor is really this test cursor. And now the idea is like, all right, we have these two items. The other thing we have is self, right? Self is the class. How do I know that? Because it's whatever's to the left of the dot. So self should be category. Okay. So now we have to put these things together to like return the correct instance. And the way I would do this is we have our cursor. So cursor.execute select all from. This would be probably the table name. This would be f string dunder dunder table dunder dunder. So select all from categories. Except this, it's complaining. So that should tell me I'm missing something. So it's probably self.dunder table. So this is capital category dot table. So select all from categories. Where, right? Name equals %s, and then we'll put in a tuple here, right? And this value should be, I'm guessing, the name, right? And let's just break this out because I don't like. This is just for stylistic reasons. I just don't like my code like going over so that I kind of have to scroll to see it. So just call this query. Right, and then we can execute, and then cursor.fetch1, because we know there's just going to be, well, that's not true. I mean, there could be multiple things. It's a category, so these really should be unique. We could put a uniqueness constraint like in the database to make sure of it. I guess for now, like this is the way it should work, so we can just return 1. And this will be my record. And we can return this for now. We'll just return the record. And then let's put a breakpoint here. Do you know it? Yeah, this is fine. So if we look at category, right? Category is whatever was returned from this, from find by name, category.find by name. And this object now is the record, okay? So what we have to do next is basically take this record and turn it into an instance. And that we can do by the build from record method, I think, right? So we should, and this is what we should be returning from, by the way, from here. So we basically want to call this build from record. So if you look at this, again, once I kind of type it in, we're importing everything from this ORM. So I can click on this and it tells me, okay, this takes a class and the record, right? And so it takes the keys are essentially these class.columns, and that would be this stuff. And then the values is the data from the record. So that's this stuff, right? And it's going to zip it together and assign the attribute. And by the way, like if you want to know how, so we can use this. So let's just use this from now. Build from record. I'll just highlight over it to make sure I'm passing through the right argument. So it takes a class followed by the record. So I have my choice. I can pass through category here and then the record and call that my category, and return that. Or I can just, this is self, right? I can also just do self, right? Because when I call this method, I'm always going to be calling it as category dot find by name. So inside the method, self is going to be what's to the left of the dot, right? It's going to be this thing. So let's just see that if that works, and we can talk a little bit more about it. So I'll run this. Let's go to test category.py. We can remove our breakpoint, and basically we should see that it passes. All right, so we have our one pass. One thing just to point out is if you want to explore, if you're like, okay, well, wait, how did this build from record thing work? Just click on it and then just put a breakpoint in here, and you can just walk through the code. So now our category, so build from record will get called because we're calling this find by name in our test, and then that calls build from record, and then here we're putting a breakpoint. So now you can kind of look, right? It's like, well, let me do it this way. What's the class? The class is the category, right? That makes sense because that's what we're passing through as self. then maybe go to the next thing. What's the record? Okay, so the record is this data. So what are we doing? We're calling class.columns is ID name. And then we're zipping it together with the class.columns and the record, and then calling dict on it, right? So this is kind of creating our list of tuples. We'll just do list for now. Sorry. Class.columns. I think this is okay. I messed it up. Okay, class.columns, comma record, and let's zip it and do the list around that. It doesn't like it. Well, let's, maybe if I do dict, who knows? Okay, that worked for whatever reason. So, okay, so this turns it into a dictionary, and then we are assigning the object. So this class parentheses thing is just, remember class is a venue. Class is our category, because that's what we're passing through from here is self, and self is always the category. So when I do class parentheses, really what I'm doing is this is like category parentheses, right? So it's creating a new category object right here, and then I'm taking the attributes of dict, these attributes, and assigning them to the object.dunderDict property. And what that does is now if I look at object, right? Object is a category object who's had its attributes assigned. So now if you do object.dunderDict, right? You can see we took these attributes and assigned them. And that's why we kind of achieved the goal of taking a record and then assigning, right, the attributes to it. Okay, so now you can do something like object.name, object.id, right? Each of these work. Okay, so we can exit out of here. The other point is a good one, which is like you will see this in code. Like instead of the word self, you'll see the word class, or this stands for class. And the idea is just to remind you that this will always be, this is a class method, so self will always be a class. All right, so if this makes more sense to you, to like, say like build from record and pass through the class and select all from the classes table, that is totally fine with me. Either way works for me. The code also works, so I can run this. We can look at the object. The object.dunderDict is fine. Press continue. It will still, you can see we're still passing. So either one that's like easier for you to, you will see both. I'm fine with either. All right, so let's just remove that breakpoint from here. And then, okay, here's this find or create by. This I think was confusing for some people. The idea is this. Okay, you can see that when, I don't know what this test is supposed to show. It's like, here's my category number. If I pass through taco places, oh, clean tables. This is interesting. So this is what you can see. We run this test, right? Then it sees, we're about to run the test, but then it sees clean tables, right? So what does that mean? It means there's nothing in our tables. So we've just deleted everything. There's no data in our database, right? Now we've yielded to the test. When you do select count from categories, there should basically be 0, right? So this right here will be 0. And now we do find or create by name, and we should see that, hey, now there's one more record, right? Because basically what I'm saying is when there's nothing in the database, when the category doesn't exist, like when taco places doesn't exist, it should create it. When it's an existing category, like in this case, we start off with clean tables, but now we'll save a category, and then, you know, we can see, all right, we have, you know, one category in the database probably, and now we call this find or create. We should have the same number, right? We should not have created a new category. Let's go, I'll let you all read through that. right? So, in this case, there's nothing in our database. We call find or create by name. We get one new record in the database, right? In this case, there is a record called Taco Place in the database. We call find or create by name, so nothing happens, and therefore we have the same number of records in the database. That's the idea. And the idea of this method overall is, like, say you are, like, eventually we'll be pulling data from APIs, right? And how many times do you have to list, a category of taco places or whatever, or fast food? Just once. We only need this category once. We can associate it with many records, but we only need it once in our database. So the idea is, like, I don't know beforehand if taco places exist in the database. So if it exists, you don't have to create again. Just give me back that object or that record. And if it doesn't exist, just please create it and then give me it back. So it's like, either way, I want you to give me back the category, but if it doesn't exist, please create it first. That's kind of the logic we want. So in order to accomplish this, we can do this. Let's write a class method called def find or create by name. Takes the class, takes the name, takes the cursor. I think that's right. Let's just make sure. Find or create by name takes the name. Oh, look at this, a connection. I don't know why I did it this way, but I did. So connection and the cursor. All right. And then what happens? Oh, I guess because we need to insert data, that's why. So what should we do next? Well, we already have the easy one down, which is basically just call find by name. Right? So we can call find by name, and that would be like class, right? Class is category dot find by name. We don't need to pass this through. This is implicit, right? This is self. Self is whatever's to the left of the dot. Find by name, pass through the cursor. This should return to me the category, right? And I can just return this for now. So this should pass the test of when there's an existing category, essentially this method should just return it. Like, that's all that should happen. So let's run the test and see if we're any further. And we are further somehow. So the one that we're off is when it's a new category. So when the category exists, just return it. And it's like, so it's if there's a category, return it. So we can do that. If category, then return it. Otherwise, what do we want to do? We want to take a category and then create it. So I can just do name equals the name. And this will be my category. And then I can save the category. Save the category. I do wonder something. If you look at this save method, it would have been smart. I don't do it. A lot of times it's nice to actually return the object. When you save it, like probably what you want to get back is that instance. I guess I don't do that. So there's different ways. I guess we can find the last. Now we can call find by name and it will return it. Like, that's probably the easiest way. And now return that. I mean, it's not the best, only because you're making a separate SQL call. I think either way you have to do it. Yeah. You kind of have to, probably should make the SQL call. Because if you don't make the SQL call, like, you want this thing to have the ID, and how are you going to get that ID without first saving it and then retrieving that ID from the database? So this is what I would do. Oh. Save is missing 2 required positional arguments, connection and cursor. Let's pass those through. Connection and cursor. So the connection and cursor are coming from this, right? Now I'll just run it. So this is passing. So we're just, so again, it's, okay, find or create by name. If it exists, look for it. If we get something, return it. If not, if this is none, right, this returns none when there's nothing here, because this build from record method says if there's no data, return none. So if there's not a category, create it, save it, and then retrieve it from the database and return it. Okay. And then kind of the next thing is essentially that, you know, we can call this class, I guess. Let's just make sure this still works if I call this class. So I just, you know, you make a change, you refactor the code a little bit, just rerun the test to make sure you're still green. So I think the next thought is just this can probably be moved, this whole function can probably be moved to the orm.py. Do I use it? Oh, I don't test that. But this is kind of the logic. Let's just do it anyway. Say I want to like give this functionality of find or create by name to a lot of different classes. Like you can imagine there's a number of classes who, you know, we want to allow this for. We could do something like this. Have the method here. You pass through the class, the name, the connection, and the cursor. This is what we need for this to work. So now I go back to category, and we can kind of like comment all this out, I think. And now just call from ORM, find or create by name. So it's just, you know, we can just do find or create by name, and that will call from here. That will look for that. If this, to make this even more, yeah, I mean, this will work, right? And it passes through this data, the class, the name, the connection, and the cursor, and then we can just return it. And it will just execute this. And the only thing, and nothing here, like the key thing is, you know, we can use this functionality not only on category, but on like venue as well, I think. The only thing we would need is this find by class.find by name. No, we should be good. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, this works. Right, because you can just run through the code. It's like we're passing through the class. Class is category, right? We're passing through the name. Name is whatever, taco places, and the connection and the cursor. So then we go to this find by name. Find by name is the class is going to be category, category.find by name. So that's now going to call this, right? Then we go to the next thing. So if there's a category, just return it. We're good. And this could be anything, right? This could be, as long as we have a find by name method on the class, we're good. And then the same thing, initialize a new class, get an instance back. So this is just an object. You know, here's the class is category. So create a new category, save it, you know, retrieve it, return it. So again, like this thing here, all these guys can just be called object if you want. Right? So find by the name, category.find by name, give me back an object. If there is an object, return it. Otherwise, you know, create a new instance of the class, save it to the database, call that class is category.find by name, return the object. So this is kind of the logic of a lot of this code is like you can first implement it directly in a class, and then if you wanted to apply to all methods, you can just move it into your library and then call it. If you want, you can call from it, you know, from here.
Hey Jeff. This might be a super dumb question. Couldn't figure it out. But in the lab, you were asking us to search by the primary key, which is the ID. But if you're running the test and it keeps dropping all of, is that okay?
Yeah, so the only way it's like, okay, so how do you deal with something like that? I think generally the way that, if you look at the way what we're doing is we are deleting all the records. Like our drop all tables is kind of a misnomer. I probably should change the name to like delete all delete records from all tables, something like that. Right, because the issue that you're seeing is that even when we delete the records, if we had like records 1 and 2, then we delete the records and then we save new ones, it doesn't start at 2, it starts at 3, right? So it's very hard to know, like, it feels like every time we run the tests, the ID is just incrementing and incrementing and incrementing. So the only way to, I think, fix that is to actually write like an actual drop table function, which would be like def drop table, and then you'd have to do like drop, this could be lowercase, by the way, but drop table, categories, right? This is different than delete all the records. This actually, we don't have a table, like there's no columns. So what you'd have to do then is then also have something that's going to recreate the table, right? So essentially to do that, you're going to have to put this code in some, like wrap this. You'd have to do something like this, def create, tables. And that would have, right, like this code. So that's why I didn't say, like, kind of give you, it's kind of annoying, but this is the way that you'd have to fix it, I think, is really get rid of the table, create a new one, then you'd start at 1. The ID will stay at 1. Yeah. And this is what they'll do, like this is what I've seen in other tutorials, like there are, like if you use SQL Alchemy, this can be achieved for you, right? Like they have functions that will basically more easily allow you to drop and recreate tables. But it's a lot of work. It's not a lot of work, but it feels a little excessive for just passing that test. Okay, so the broader kind of point is, okay, well, there's a couple things. One is, like, remember to put in breakpoints. Like, if you want to explore the library or, like, any code, it's like, if you're using it, you can put a breakpoint inside of it. And then I generally like to put the breakpoint at the last line before, like, there's an error, or the last line before we're returning. And that way I can explore everything above in the function, right? Other points are just, remember, class methods. We are calling this on the class, category dot find by name. This is self. You can refer to this however you want. So you can put self here, or you can put CLS here, right? And then I generally like to like code it out for 1. And then if you want to, you can abstract this into like an orm.py file and just make it generic, right? This could be any class, find the name. If there's an object, return it, right? What do we need for that? The class better have a name, like we need a name column, obviously, but a number, maybe we, that seems somewhat likely for some of these models. Okay. All right. Other questions about this? The other thing to say is, very typical is just like get back the data and then build from record, right? Like you'll see this pattern a lot, right? Perform a select statement, execute it, get back the record, call build from record. Like use this build from record to return an instance, right? We want to, return instances from a lot of these. Okay, let me just show you kind of, let me see, does Venue, let's look at the, Venue doesn't have a category. That's a bummer. Well, let's move to a new domain really quickly. Yeah, all right, let's delete this. Okay, so this is our MoseBar lab that we saw like a long time ago. And just remember, like, what we have is the key table is orders, right? So you can think like an order, if you have an order class, an order belongs to like a customer, right? An order, like, this is Bart Simpson ordered a milkshake from Mo, right? So an order has a customer, it has a drink, and has a bartender. And then a bartender has many orders that is served, right? A drink is associated with many orders. A customer, right, has many orders. But this is kind of like the key table. And what I wrote out, we already have our database. If you call, I guess we have to get out of here. This is my bar. ORM relations reading. I think that's where we are. Yeah, this seems right. Okay. So if you, yeah, here we are. So if I call the console.py, right, and you look at the orders, you'll see that we have a list of orders. How did we get this? We just called find all, right? The find all method that you wrote in the last lab. And if you look at any of these orders, this is an order, order.dunderdict, right? You'll see these attributes. So this is like, the customer ID, maybe this is Bart, order the milkshake from Mel. So now we want to write a method so that if I call order.customer, it's going to return to me that instance, right? Like Bart Simpson, that object. So how do we do that? So let's just copy this as an example. So this is essentially the data. This is self, right? This is the data, or this is self.dunderdict to be more accurate. Right? This is the data in self. So what do we want to be the return value? So it's like whenever we're writing functions, it's like what's the input, what's the output? We only have one argument here. We only have one thing available, that's self. And I guess you have access to the database. That's it. And then what do we want the output to be? We want the output to be a customer instance. Right? This is the output. So this is the return value. Return a customer. So given an order, right? This itself is an order. Return to me the proper customer. So how do we do that? So start with cursor.execute. We have access to the cursor because of this DB. All right. So we go cursor.execute, select all from what? What do I want to return? A customer, right? Select all from customers where the ID equals %s, comma, and then pass through what? Pass through an ID, okay, right? So which ID? Self.customer ID. Pass through the order's customer ID, and that should return to me the proper customer. Right? It's complaining. Is it? No, maybe not. Let's just again just use our pattern of move this to be a query. And then put that here. Alright, and then what will we do? Cursor.fetch1. We're only going to get one record, right? An order has one customer. And now what do we want to do? Build from record. What kind of object do we want returned? A customer object. Is self a customer? Now, to find out what self is, you just look to the top. You see self as an order. So really, we need to pass through a customer. Do we have that defined? No. From API.models, import API.models as models. Let's take a look at this thing. So in here, we have a customer in this models package. So we can say from this can be models.customer. Oh, sorry. What am I doing? Cursor.fetch1, that's my record. And then this build from record takes a class, and the class should be a customer instance. And we can get that by doing models.customer. So we'll do that. Models.customer, comma, the record. Let's return this. Okay, so what's going on here? We have an order. We're going to call order.customer. That will select all from customers where the ID equals 1, right? Where ID equals self.customer ID. So give me the customer where the ID is 1, return the record, then turn that record into an instance by passing through the name of the class that I want this to be an instance of and the data. So let's exit out of here and see. So here's my order. If I do order.customer, it breaks. So why? Query near percentage line 11. Where ID? Select all from customers. Oh, is this? So it does not like this. It's not even getting here.
Right?
Oh, this is SQLite. Very, very good. Thank you. You saved the... Otherwise, we'd be here for a long time. All right. So here's my order. So order.customer, that works. So I just had to change the %s to a question mark because %s is for Postgres and we're using SQLite. So if you look at the customer, this thing, this order.customer returns the related instance. You can see the ID is 1. All right. So, we'll go through this again on Tuesday, but this is kind of the next step is now building relational methods that query our database and then return the appropriate instance. Okay. This is the next step to our code base. We will have a quiz on this stuff along the way, by request. Maybe not, obviously not this part, but maybe the earlier parts. So the point is review this curriculum, hopefully feel familiar with this. I'd say definitely by Thursday, or the next Sunday, we'll have this, okay? All right, nice work.